Hi there, and welcome to the C-10 podcast, where we mainly talk about leadership and mentoring in 10 questions with changemakers, mostly with ties to the Kansas City area. This is all part of the C of the Major Leagues Foundation, and specifically a tie-in to our C-10 mentoring and leadership program. I'm Matt Folks, Executive Director of C of the Major Leagues, and usual host of this podcast. I'm honored that you've chosen to listen this week. Thank you so much. Now, let's get into this week's conversation. This is episode 150 of the C-10 podcast, and we're going to be straight outside of Kansas City a little bit and chat with someone that has helped me immensely from a professional standpoint and somebody that I've just become a big fan of during the past few years. It's Stephen Screen, the co-founder of Better Fundraising Company in the Seattle area. But first, before we get to Stephen, our third annual CO Top Golf event is on Thursday night, May 23rd at Top Golf in Overland Park. If you'd like to support students and have a blast with 5 other friends, coworkers, family, or just some random folks you invite, please visit cotopgolf.com for more details. And we are getting really close. I think as I record this, we're down to 2 bays remaining. So if you don't get a bay, you can still be a part of our online auction, which is getting ready to start in sometime in mid-May. So visit cotopgolf.com to get more information about that. Now on to this week's guest, Stephen Screen. He's the co-founder and creative director of Better Fundraising Company in Seattle, which launched 10 years ago this month, I believe. But he's been with other agencies and working with nonprofits during an incredible 31-year career. He's been vital to several things that we've done here at C of the Major Leagues during the past 5 or 6 years, and we'll touch on that. But it was the fall of, I think, 2018, probably 3 years or so into this job, and I'm still trying to figure out how in the world to become a fundraiser because it wasn't my background. And I came across a video conversation between these two guys, Chris Davenport and Stephen Screen, talking about fundraising and storytelling. And man, I was hooked. And it sent me down a rabbit hole of blog posts, ebooks, and in 2020, a conference and so much more since then. So we've had Chris Davenport on this podcast. So now I'm really excited about this chat. I want to learn more about Stephen, talk more about leadership in the nonprofit world, and who knows what else we'll get into here in these next few minutes. So with that, it's my privilege to introduce you to Stephen Screen. Welcome to the See You in the Major League Sheds. Stephen, how are you this week?
I'm good, Matt. Thank you for having me. What a joy to get to do this with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited we were able to do it. Wanted to do it for a while, and we've been trying to schedule it, so it's great to finally be able to
here we are.
Sit here face to face. So, well, we have a lot to discuss and a lot of things that we'll cover, but we like to start these with what we call pregame batting practice, just a chance to get to know you a little bit better. So here we go. Question number 1. My hero growing up was?
Well, in it, my head just went to the baseball context because of See You in the Major Leagues, and I lived in LA until I was 9. So it was Steve Garvey, Dusty Baker, Steve Yeager, Ron Say, Fernando Valenzuela, all of those Dodgers from the 70s. Yeah, that is fun to think about. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
So you grew up in the Fernando Mania days then?
Absolutely right. Listening to Vin Scully, and that was fun. I ended up not being particularly good at baseball, but that's my core baseball experience, and I used to love going to games with my dad.
That's awesome. So cool. Question number 2. My first paying job was?
Mowing lawns in the neighborhood. Every Saturday morning I did a circuit, 3 or 4 lawns.
Nice.
A small handful of dollars per lawn, but it was great.
And where was that? If you moved out of LA at 9, where was that?
Yep, that would have been outside Seattle on a place called Bainbridge Island, where I grew up.
Very cool. Question number 3. To relax, I like to?
Let's see. I play tennis. I play the occasional video game. Not very often anymore. Right now, I'm doing yard work.
Oh,
and I feel like that's a total old guy move, but it's great. I can see that I've made progress when I'm done. My kids don't like it, so they leave me alone because they don't want to get roped in. So it's for now, the Venn diagram of what I get out of yard work is really great.
Now, I will say that once your kids leave and you're 6 or 7 years behind us kid wise, it's a little different. I mean, I still
Yes.
take pride in the lawn, but it's not as much of a getaway anymore. It's just
Yeah.
kind of a drudgery that you have to do. So
Yeah, I think of it as I have this workforce. My kids 14, 13, and 11, and this workforce that is aging into their prime years, but are not picking it up as fast as I would like. But I know I'm only going to have a few years with them, so
yeah.
that is a thing that I want them to be a part of, working around the house.
Because even now, so we have our middle one's about to graduate here in about a month, and our youngest is a freshman in college. And when they were at home last summer, it would be, hey, the yard could use some cutting. Oh, Dad, I've got to go to work. And it's like, all right, fine, I'll go do it.
Yep.
Your old
Yep.
man will go do it. That's fine.
Yep.
Hey, question number 4: if I could meet one person in history, it would be.
Oh man, I don't have an easy answer to that question. My faith background makes me want to say Jesus.
Mhm.
I, man, who do I? There have been so many people that have been really interesting and smart. I'm going to give you a weird answer, which is there was a guy in fundraising by the name of Russ Reed, and he started a very large agency, first in Chicago and then out in LA when they got World Vision as a client. He was one of the first people in the 60s who was using direct response fundraising nationally, and was just apparently a charismatic, really interesting guy who was
Hmm,
great with people. And I've always thought, oh, I would love to have dinner with him and pick his brain.
there you go. Well, let's go back a couple years. Tell me about 17-year-old Stephen Screen.
Let's see. He's a senior in high school. He's playing a bunch of tennis. He's not very sure of himself or self-confident, but he's a good student. Applying to colleges and trying to figure out where he fits.
Hmm. So you end up at Claremont McKenna College.
Yeah, good
That,
research, man.
yeah, well, it's part of the fun I get out of doing these, which I believe is in that Southern California or Northern.
Southern California. Yep, yeah, a little
Okay.
east of Los Angeles.
Okay. How did you end up going there?
Really strong academic program. A couple states away from home, and a strong tennis program that I could play for. I wasn't a D1 athlete, but I was strong for the level that I played at. And then their focus was business and government.
Hmm.
One of the two, I wanted to go in one of those two areas, so that made sense to me.
What were you like at that point? I mean, what did you want to study? What did you study? When did your confidence begin to take shape?
Let's see. My major was international relations.
Mhm.
My goal was to go into the Foreign Service after graduating from college.
Oh,
I mean, I guess a little bit in college, I started to sort of figure out who I was and what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, but had almost I shouldn't say no. I didn't have that much self-confidence at that point, other than I knew I was good at school. So I didn't really sort of start to find myself and figure out who I really was until my mid to late 20s.
so I think that's the way it is for a lot of us.
I think so. I think so. That's certainly the way it was for me.
We'll talk about your dad, Bob Screen, here throughout this, but you end up getting out of college and going to work at Screen Communications.
Yes.
What happened to going into the foreign service or something along those lines?
My dad, Bob, again, good research, had an agency. He had started a company that helped nonprofits raise money. And it was a successful agency that was in Seattle. And I had worked there at least one summer in college, maybe two summers in college. Starting at the bottom, I purged files, which meant that I went through the big metal filing cabinets of projects that were older than 2 or 3 years and got rid of everything that wasn't needed.
Mhm.
I made cardboard. I made hundreds of cardboard boxes that we sent stuff to radio stations in. I spiral bound so many booklets, Matt, you would not believe, with a machine. Chunk, chunk. So I knew the business a little bit. My senior year in college, when I'm about to graduate. I'm thinking about signing up for the test you take to go into the Foreign Service, and figuring out sort of when and where I'm going to do that. And his vice president leaves his agency and tries to take two clients with them.
Hmm.
And dad calls and says, "Hey, this has happened. I could use an extra hand around here. After you graduate, could you come work and fill in and do whatever you can?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So rather than taking the foreign service test, after, let's see, well, we did nationals for tennis, and then I went home and started working. And I learned two things really quickly that were super helpful for my career. One was that the successful fundraising organizations are kind of following a formula, and that my dad gave me some things. He's like, "I need you to write some of these, look at the ones that we've done. These are the ones that have worked. Notice what's going on, and give me more of those." And I was able to do that. It was a model that I was able to follow. When I would do that, the second lesson was that he would give me really hard critical feedback. This word doesn't mean that. It means this sentence. You're trying to say this, but you've actually said that. And really, really tough edits that were hard to take, but incredibly helpful in my ability to communicate. So that combination of realizing there's a model and getting really good critical feedback early on was really helpful for developing my mind to sort of try to be good at this thing. We realized that I had a little bit of a knack for it,
Mhm.
and never ended up taking the foreign service exam.
So let's just say like 17 to 22-ish.
Yep.
Did you set out at all at any point to say, "Hey, I'm gonna follow in Dad's footsteps," or anything like that? Or is it like we see a lot of times, kind of the opposite, and saying, "No way I'm going that direction."
I thought it would be really neat to, well, let me put it this way, Matt. I read enough fantasy novels in high school about princes and kings and stuff that I thought it would be pretty great if if I was a worthy inheritor towards the kingdom that my dad had established. So I thought it would be neat. I was drawn to the idea of going to work for my dad, learning what he knew how to do, and then trying to run it on my own someday. That ended up not happening, but I was drawn to that. So it wasn't like he yanked me away from the foreign service. This was
Right.
a thing I was interested in.
Did you always enjoy telling stories and writing and the things that you were suddenly doing right out of school?
Not really. I
Hmm.
wasn't confident enough to talk that much. I was better at math than reading and than writing, excuse me, and expressing myself that way. All of that has been sort of a learned behavior for me.
We've seen so many stories here in the last few years about your dad's influence on people, being a great mentor to so many in this business. What was it like for you though to work for him, work with him, and just learn these lessons from him?
How how long do we have? Uh, I mean, there are a couple of buckets that it falls into. Number one, he was at the leading edge of fundraising at the time, and so it was incredible to learn from him. Do this, don't do that. Here's why. Here's the principle. He was very clear what he was doing, and was very data driven in terms of what worked better than other stuff. So I learned right away that there is a sort of a data driven, evidence based worldview for what types of fundraising tend to work better than others,
Mhm.
and that I should figure out what that is and do that, and I would have success. So that was incredible to learn from someone so experienced. and clearly respected by his peers, period. And my dad was a really tough guy to work for. He, I mean, one of the largest agencies in the country right now was started by some people who left my dad's shop because they didn't like working for him
Mm.
because he was very hard on people. And he was hard on me too. I worked for him for almost 8 years. And I remember counting at some point and going, I think I got 5 or 6 compliments over those 7, 8 years.
Mhm.
And so there was that was difficult. And I left ultimately because the father son boss employee thing was all messed up and he and I were not in a good place. He was a hard guy to work for. And I was his son. So that sort of adds another depth to the thing.
Mhm.
And thankfully I left the sort of strength to do that. And our relationship got steadily better after that.
Hmm. So obviously we talk a lot about leadership and mentoring, and how would you describe him as a leader?
Um, Insightful, demanding, didn't suffer fools. The way I encapsulate it, there's some more depth here, but the way I describe him is he was hard on ideas and hard on people. By hard on ideas, I mean really picking them apart. Does this make sense? Or do you mean what you say you mean? Is
Mhm.
this going to do really what we want it to do? Have we defined what we're trying to do really clearly? Right? So hard on ideas, hard on people. I try to be hard on ideas and easy on people. To answer your question, that's the summary of what I took away of trying to keep his rigor in terms of thinking things through, doing a
Mhm.
good job, making sure you know what you're doing, and yet being kind to the people around who aren't, for me, for instance, 31 years I've been doing fundraising now. Most people aren't as far along the fundraising continuum as I am, only because of time, not because of talent, not because of anything else. And so I try to recognize that all the time when I'm talking to someone who says, well, why in the world would we use the mail? The mail is dead. Well, okay, well, let's talk about that as opposed to slapping my head and calling them names.
Right.
This is J.R. Buckner, President and CEO of First Federal Bank of Kansas City. We hope you're enjoying this week's conversation. For this week's Student Spotlight, I'd like you to meet one of the students in our C-10 Mentoring and Leadership program.
My name is John Wilson. I go to Lincoln College Preparatory Academy, and C-10 has made an impact on my life because I had to learn how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I am a talker, but at the same time, if I don't really know anybody, then I kind of get quiet. But C-10 has taught me it doesn't matter who you are as a person, just speak up because, you might learn something from somebody else if you speak up.
First Federal Bank of Kansas City is proud to make a donation this week to the Post-High School Scholarship Fund for seniors in the C-10 Mentoring and Leadership program. If you'd like to join us in this effort to give our future leaders an opportunity after high school, please click on the link in the show's notes. Now back to this week's conversation.
Well, as you mentioned, you were with Screen Communications for about 8 years and a couple other agency stops along the way. But then it was I think about 10 years ago this month that you and Jim Shapiro started the Better Fundraising Company. So how did you and Jim meet and decide, hey, let's do this to help nonprofits?
We were both playing in a charity golf tournament around 2001. And I was a donor to an organization that was putting on the golf tournament, and so was Jim. I don't know if Jim was a donor, it doesn't matter. He was connected. And the person who was the major gifts officer put me and Jim in a cart together at the tournament because he thought that we would enjoy each other. We had a great time playing golf. And I remember thinking that day, I'm going to work with Jim in some way. I don't know how, but I'm going to work with him at some point in my career. So that's 2001. I found out later Jim felt the same. He and I then stayed in touch. Both of us were out on our own, and I did some work on his clients a couple times. He did some work on my clients a couple times. And then around 2013, we started we'd always been in touch, and then we started to have more conversations and going, oh, the two of us together could probably help a lot of organizations, which that would probably mean we could have a real business here. Let's join forces.
Just from a from a business model standpoint, it seems to work really well, really from day one, because your strengths are different.
Yep,
And
absolutely right. In the Venn diagram of his strengths and my strengths, there's some overlapping knowledge because we've both been helping nonprofits for the vast majority of our careers, but his skills are different than mine, both in terms of running our business and in terms of helping a nonprofit grow or face whatever challenge. So that's been really helpful because we both have, there's overlap, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but there's overlap in terms of our lanes for both running the business and working with nonprofits. But for the most part, those two things are different, which has been really helpful.
yeah, you'd known him for a few years and had been a part of similar projects together, but were there any challenges just as you're building this working relationship together and building this business together?
Yeah. Challenges that stemmed from having been our own bosses for a while and having a partner. There was a time where Jim made a banking decision that and I was like, wait a minute, hold on. You made this decision, but you didn't you just sort of told me what we're going to do, and I would like to have a voice here.
Mhm.
And he was right, by the way, but he was sort of going back into the solopreneur as opposed to partner. And then for me, there was a time where he was very much put off because he felt like I was critiquing him, and I was just trying to be hard on the idea and go, I don't think this is the right thing. And so I had to go, hold on, I gotta do this differently with my partner. So there were those types of things. But for the most part, Matt, our values are pretty much the same, and our communication is good. And man, those two things are incredibly helpful to have a successful partnership.
So you guys are doing this for a few years on your own, just the two of you, and then you start growing. And how many employees now does Better Fundraising Company have?
11
Scattered about the country, not just in Seattle.
scattered about in the country. That's been great, frankly, in that we pay competitive rates, and with Zoom today, you can be anywhere. So we have found a bunch of great people all over the country, and geography it's just not a big factor in the hiring process.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of cool for us because I mean, here we are in Kansas City, and we've been working with you guys in a couple different capacities for the last few
Yeah.
years, and so there's we deal with Josh a lot, who's over on the East Coast somewhere, and then Mary and Sarah, who are upper
Yep.
Midwest, and so
Yeah.
it's kind of cool to see that. But as you guys are adding employees, and you had worked alone for several years, what was it like from a leadership standpoint for you to suddenly say, okay, I've got to start turning some of this stuff over to somebody else, and I've got to let them do it the way they need to do it, but I need to lead them through this at the same time.
I was fortunate in that I had worked with freelancers quite a bit, so I had some knowledge of how to sort of the care and feeding of a freelancer or a creative. And I had worked in a couple big agencies, so I sort of knew my way around that a little bit. But for me, I had to, let's see. So I generally speaking, sort of came up through the agency ranks as a copywriter, and then someone who's just thinking about strategy. And so I would be hard on copy, but thankfully I had learned a lesson. Whatever the project that you're trying to do, the standard we're trying to meet is the client's standard, not my standard. So success is defined by whatever is going to achieve the outcome that the client is trying to achieve, not some standard that I personally have.
Mhm.
And so, though it's hard for me sometimes, admittedly, I knew relatively early on that, like, hey, hold on, our goal here is to make this good enough. That sounds like we're just trying to be good enough, but I think that you get the idea.
Oh, yeah.
This has got to be good enough to do what the client wants. We're not trying to make Stephen happy. So I try to lean into that.
Has it been difficult?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. And there's a continuum. We work with some clients who are brand new, and they do not need national level quality fundraising. They do not need that to succeed. They can do fantastic with not quite all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. And then there are some clients who, like, they are persnickety, or they've got 110,000 donors, and we're really paying attention to every penny, and we've got to make sure we do the thing. So there's that's part of it too, is paying attention to what's right for each client.
And so just for the listener's sake, let's point this out. So see in the major leagues, we are a nonprofit. We, like I said, we've leaned on Better Fundraising Company for some things over the years to help with. If you're listening and you have to be a donor, I'm sure that you've seen an appeal that we've sent out, and it's been influenced by Stephen and the folks at Better Fundraising. And then there are companies like Better Fundraising Company that, as you've just mentioned, Stephen, you guys work with several organizations of all different sizes. I mean, whether it's the orgs like See in the Major Leagues with 1 or 2 employees to, organizations with 110,000 donors or whatever it might be. Did you ever think about, hey, I want to go into the nonprofit space or working for a singular nonprofit, or is it more enjoyable for you to help different organizations, different sizes over the years?
Because of my background, I knew 2 things. Hopefully more than that. But I knew that you couldn't make really good money working at a nonprofit. And I had seen my dad have some success and saw that was because he was serving a bunch of nonprofits, and thought, okay, well, that's a direction I want to go. And then number 2, I also knew that I wasn't really cut out to. I think I would get bored and my performance would degrade over time if I was only at one organization.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would go. That's not what I should do.
Hey, we got to know our strengths, don't we?
We got to know our strengths.
So I'm gonna go back to your dad for just a second, because he died, I think it was about almost 3 years ago, roughly, as we sit here today. But, as I get older, and, we just mentioned that you and I are pretty much the same age. I think we graduated college the same year, but I was on the 5-year plans. But as the older I get, at 54 now, I think more about legacy and kind of the dash between the beginning and the end, if you will, on a tombstone. And I mean, you guys, through the conference, through what you're doing with Better Fundraising, through what you do with Work Less, Raise More, I mean, you've helped probably thousands of nonprofits, but certainly thousands of people around the world. Obviously your dad's legacy and all the people that he had helped with his work throughout the years. And we're talking individuals that are helped by these nonprofits, not to mention the nonprofits themselves. But I mean, how much does that make your heart swell, knowing that your dad had this influence, and now you and Jim and Chris and others are having the same influence on? I mean, you're touching people here in Kansas City from Seattle.
I think about this a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit, and I'm sort of thrilled at what my dad was able to be a part of, and the impact that he had on a lot of organizations and their beneficiaries. And then to know that I am able to take some of that hard-won knowledge, because he was in the sort of the first generation that was figuring this stuff out, to take that and then trying to expand it to make it more available to more people is meaningful. I remember asking him at one point, why don't, because he had answers for everything. He had seen it all. I was like, why don't you write a book? And his response was, why in the world would I give away the competitive advantage that I have over everyone and that my clients have for hiring me to someone else for $20? And I understood that from, there's a particular point of view where that makes a ton of sense, but it never sat well with me. And then when I left helping big national nonprofits, I saw that the smaller nonprofits, who I assumed knew all the same stuff, I saw that small nonprofits didn't know anything. And then I started looking into it and seeing, this is a long answer to your question, Matt. but seeing the incredible explosion in the number of nonprofits in the 90s and 2000s, the lack of any real training for how to do fundraising, and then a whole generation of folks sort of eternally lapsed without passing on some of their knowledge about how to do this. And I think there's a massive knowledge gap, especially at small to medium-sized nonprofits, for how to do effective fundraising. And I feel like I'm very fortunately placed in a role where I could do some of that. And I always felt like it's not a zero-sum game. We should be sharing this knowledge as much as possible. If we can raise the tide, all the boats go up. And so I think about that all the time. How can we make these ideas spread? How can we make them spread to help as many organizations and people as possible? And if we do that, my theory is that a good business will be there too.
Right.
As opposed to the really make the good business and lock the knowledge in. So I'm trying to come at it from the other way, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me because, I mean, I literally, on Friday, I printed this off and just brought it out to the shed today. But I mean, I've got this ebook,
I love
Appeal
it.
Letters in a Box. And I mean, it's just this resource from Better Fundraising that has all sorts of letters that have worked over the years, and you've made notations on them. And I mean, you're giving it away for free, but it's helping the little guys out there.
Yeah, most people don't know this, but the original name for the Better Fundraising Company was Better Fundraising for All. That was the first blog that we started, but we had no revenue model. We thought that if we give it all away, a business would magically come in. I'm selling us a little bit short, but there's some truth in that jab. And so like, hold on, we both know the agency model. Let's do that. And then the first thing to do to share the knowledge was to start a blog on the understanding that if we successfully give away really helpful knowledge, people will start paying attention. And if enough people are paying attention, enough of them are going to need someone to do the work, and they'll hire us. And while VCs are not knocking down our doors to give us money to expand, we've been growing at 20% a year every year. We hope to keep going. So there's a business there too.
Just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap this up. But 31 years you've been in this, and then you saw it, before that through your dad. What's maybe one thing, maybe two things that, I mean, obviously it's continuing to change. I was on a call today with one of our bigger sponsors, and their company is involved with a few different nonprofits, and he said, "Hey, have you guys tried this? Have you guys tried that?" And it's things that, from a business standpoint, they've seen with other nonprofits, and even some of the simpler things you would think, like Venmo and ways to take donations and whatnot. And so we went down a couple different rabbit holes with that. And then of course you got AI coming around. But what are maybe one or two things that 30, 31, 32, 33 years ago still apply here in 2024?
The single biggest one, I think, is if you are good at asking people to help your beneficiaries, you'll be successful in fundraising. But there always have been lots of headwinds pushing against that.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard work to ask. It's emotionally vulnerable to ask. There are strains of thinking within the fundraising community that it's bad to ask. Mm-hmm. And you're taking advantage of people to ask. And I don't think any of those hold up under scrutiny. And I think there's a theology, as it were, of asking that's incredibly powerful and on very firm footing. So just asking donors to help beneficiaries is this incredible thing that sort of will always want to be out of favor, but the most successful fundraisers are good at it. That's number one. I guess the second thing I would say is, I have to sort of explain this, which I don't like, and it's ironic, but clarity of communication. It is remarkable how often you see pieces of fundraising where you don't know, you're the recipient, you don't know what your gift is going to do. And it happens because the people at nonprofits are so different and so much more educated in what they do than the recipients of the fundraising. And it happens because people are moving fast. right? I'm processing emails one second or whatever, and direct mail, you got me for 5 or 7 seconds. And it's to get good at describing why the gift is needed and what the gift is going to do. And then later on in different pieces of communication, why the donor's gift was so important and how big a difference it made. You get good at those things and you're going to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really easy to get wrapped up in our thinking, our own way of language and vernacular and jargon. It's hard to communicate clearly.
Mm-hmm. How have mentors helped you in this journey?
Oh my gosh, man. Knowing people are in my corner and want me to succeed, the ability to call someone with a question, the occasional critical feedback and guidance. Along the line, there have absolutely been some people who have sort of changed my trajectory that are just incredibly valuable.
Stories are incredibly powerful for all of us. And it doesn't matter what business you're in, doesn't matter what you do, what you don't do. I mean, stories are just incredible for all of us in so many different ways. If you're talking to a business leader and talking about the importance of storytelling, and he or she says, it's Stephen, I don't know what story to tell. I don't even know how to get started telling a story. What advice would you give?
Where I always go back to is, what does the customer or potential customer value? And then I try to look at, well, from a fundraising perspective, I try to look at what part of our programs or activities are aligned with what the donor values. And from a business point of view, I'm trying to look at, okay, what is this? Because our business is serving nonprofits. What is this nonprofit trying to achieve that we can help them with at a reasonable cost? And like the story that we tell, it's a super small story, but it is a story nonetheless, where we say, for less than the cost of an employee, we can create your fundraising. And that I go further, but that right there sort of tells a little story that doesn't really have any numbers in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to move as quickly as possible to what they are trying to achieve. So that's how we think about it.
Yeah. Finally, I asked you about 17-year-old Stephen Screen. If you could go back today, what would you tell him?
To be confident, to trust your instincts, and that there are all of these benefits that accrue from hard work. And it's, man, when you're 17, it's so hard to know that. Right. I am sort of incredibly thankful that I sort of came up in a family that valued hard work and went to school with a bunch of people who worked hard and saw that was a thing. And even though I didn't know where I was going to end up, that hard work ended up producing some good long-term benefits. I think Matt, that's what that kid. Not that I was flighty or anything like that, but I think that if that kid heard those things, he would have sort of moved through the world with a little less worry and a little bit more confidence.
I'm with you. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Matt. Fun to get to do this with you after so many years of sort of being a partner, occasionally side by side and sometimes from afar. But I'm so glad to know that you were helpful, and good on you for all the work that you've been doing and all the kids that have been helped.
Well, that does it for this episode of the C-10 Mentoring and Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, we hope that you'll leave a favorable review on your favorite podcast platform. If you didn't enjoy it, or you have other comments or suggestions for potential guests, you can click on the comment link in the show's notes. We drop a new episode at the end of every week, but be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an interview. And if you or your company would like to help underwrite this podcast, let me know. Until next time, this is Matt Folks for the See You in the Major Leagues Foundation saying be safe and take care.